Hello and welcome back to our next episode of Why Such a Fuss. So today we are going to talk about the difference between a controller and a processor, which are two key roles in the GDPR. The GDPR defines a data controller as the entity that determines the purpose and the means of how the data is processed. So in other words, or in lame terms, that means that the entity, the business, decides what data to collect, for what purpose, under which lawful basis, how and where to store it, how long to retain it, who to share it with, etc., and a lot more. So in other words, they control the processing of the data. That's why it's called data controller. The data processor is defined as an entity that processes data on behalf of the controller under specific instructions for a specific process. So who can be a processor? So for example, if you're bringing in an accountant that does your payroll, they are a processor. If you bring in an IT service provider, they are your processor. An HR consultant, a GDPR consultant, a CRM provider. The HR system, or the company that provides you with your HR system, they are a processor. Your usual suspect, Microsoft, Google, Amazon Web Servers, all of those are processors. It is also important to remember that GDPR puts an obligation on both the controller and processor and holds them both accountable to put in place a very important document called the Data Processing Agreement, DPA for short. And this agreement clearly states each entity's obligations, not only towards each other, but also towards a data subject, i.e. a living individual. The regulation goes on to actually list down the clauses required in the agreement, and they are not negotiable. A client of mine was in the process of selecting a new CRM, and the provider asked for the audit clause to be removed from the agreement. Guess what I said? Needless to say, my client is now engaged with another provider. So if you are a processor, make sure that you understand your obligations. They are mandatory. You cannot move away from them. So understand them, because you could be losing a client. Make sure that you are on top of your GDPR. Controllers are obliged to only engage with processors that are compliant. So my recommendation for controllers is to really read the terms and conditions that a processor sends to your way, because sometimes they merged the data processing agreement clauses into the terms and conditions. So everything is in one document, which is absolutely fine. There's not an issue with that. Just make sure that they've not cut out some of the clauses, which I have come across that. Some other times they would have a data processing agreement as a separate document, and mine refers to the main agreement. So sometimes they're together, sometimes they're separate. Either way is fine. Just make sure that they've not removed any of the clauses. If they've not included the clauses in their terms and conditions, or they've not sent you a separate agreement, a data processing agreement, then it means that they've not considered that. It means that they've missed out the obligation that the regulation holds them accountable to. Then it becomes your responsibility to send them a DPA. So just bear that in mind. So if you are a controller, always have one ready. Ultimately, is that there must be a DPA in place. Not having one is actually breaking the law. I actually have James with me from Uptech again. So hello, James.
Hi, Christina.
And James and Uptech actually are a perfect example of a processor who is also a controller. So they are an IT provider, as James mentioned many times, specializing in cybersecurity. They are a processor to their client because they are processing their IT support on behalf of the client. So like, for example, help desk. But they're also a controller because they have employees. So from an employee's point of view, they are a controller. So James, do you have a DPA in place with your clients?
Yes, we do, Christina. Yes,
Good.
we do. And it was when we actually put that in place, it was one of the things that a lot of customers were like, what's this all about? But because we do it as a separate agreement, and because we have access to 365, we receive emails from those people. We obviously have access to devices given when they give us permission. Then we needed to have that in place because we do fulfill both those roles, even almost to a point where we provide both those roles to customers, let alone the fact that we've got that in-house as well. And it was quite an interesting conversation with a lot of people because they didn't really understand where that was coming from. And it has been a great thing to do. And then also to do it to our vendors as well was even more interesting.
Yeah, because I bet they were not ready for that.
No, they weren't. But it took a little bit of time, but we did get them all to agree and sign off in the end, or provide their own to us. So, but we process so much data on an hourly basis, let alone on a daily basis, on an hourly basis. Yeah, the amount of emails with telephone numbers, names, addresses that all come through.
Yeah.
That we need to make sure that those people know that we are protecting that as well.
Yes, that's right. Yeah. Good. Excellent. Thank you again for supporting me with these podcasts, James. Your input is always valuable. And
Thank
it's
you,
a
Christina.
good way for me to use you as my guinea pig to demonstrate when I'm sort of explaining something. Thank you again for joining us. If you would like to know more about GDPR and how it applies to your business, we can be reached at info@cvgsolutions.co.uk. Alternatively, on social media, just search for CVG Solutions. We are on LinkedIn, Facebook, and Instagram. Or otherwise, our website is full of golden nuggets, and obviously where you can access further episodes from this podcast at www.cvgsolutions.co.uk. Thank you again, and see you next time.